Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of June 8th. June 8th, 2016. I'm Mike Bonin, along here with David Rue. We'll be joined by Nuri Martinez shortly. Thanks, everybody, for their patience for our late start today. Council ran late, didn't actually end until a little after 1, so thank you. Let me start, as is the custom here, with our multimodal roll call. That always makes Salita smile whenever I say that. Who over the past 2 weeks has commuted by train? Okay. By bus? Ooh, a lot of bus this week. That's very good. Pedestrian? All right, there's clearly some newcomers here because they didn't raise their hand on the pedestrian part. You guys, I assume, walked over from Parker Center today? All right, raise your hands. Very good. Okay, so let's get down to business. I am going to quickly adjourn the regular meeting and go into the special meeting, and which is the general manager's report. Before you start, let's dispense with public comment, which is Ms. Ramirez and no name.
That's right. Very good to start the meeting without a quorum in violation of the Broad Act. We're off to a good start today, folks. Give them all a hand. Now, what is this? Verbal report, ongoing projects and programs. You're going to get rid of lanes of traffic so cars can't move. So that when the cars can't move, you get more carbon footprint, you sell more gas, you line the pockets of the refineries. It's just a scam to keep us all in traffic so we can't get from point A to point B. Because nobody needs all this garbage. We don't need a mobility. We need to get all of those bicycle lanes and all that crap you're putting up over there on Los Angeles Street. Take a nice bulldozer and elect a new president and get rid of all of it and open up those lanes to traffic so we can move. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you very much. Speaking about the LA DOT ongoing projects and programs, before you go on to other projects, first resolve the pending ones now. I've tried to board Dash A going from First and Spring to Little Tokyo, actually to the voting. I had to vote yesterday. So I tried to get onto the LA DOT bus, the Dash bus, with my shopping cart. And I've had about 4 black women shut the door in my face or not even open it up. I kept yelling, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks. And I've never been so rudely treated, but it's always by these black people, the black bus drivers. They would not open the doors, and if they did, they would shut it and slam it in my face. And I said, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I've got to get to the voting booth, but I can't because I'm too busy kissing some asses over here. So again, it was Dash A about 5 o'clock p.m. yesterday, and it's not the first time.
Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Reynolds, please come on up.
Good afternoon, Councilman. As we do on a monthly basis, I'd like to use my time to recognize some of the outstanding staff that we have at LADOT. So please stand when I call your name. First, I am pleased to recognize Stacy Arenas. Stacy is an accounting clerk, too, with the Special Parking Fund section. She performs reconciliation work for the meter revenue collections and the big revenue parking lots, such as Hollywood and Highland and the Hollywood Parking Group. She also assists in the receivables tracking of mitigation funds. In the year and a half that she has worked with LADOT, she has consistently exceeded everyone's expectations. She is enthusiastic, takes initiative, and maintains great working relationships with her peers and customers. She is detail-focused, and her can-do attitude empowers her to find simple solutions to complex problems. This recognition will further inspire her to excel at her present assignment. Thank you, Stacy. And I do just want to recognize that the accounting team is also here. Would you mind standing, accounting team? Accountants never get enough love, and I just thought it would be good to take a moment. You know, they are really some of the invisible heroes of the department, and they keep us moving. Next, Guillermo Villapondo, Traffic Marking and Signs Superintendent 1. Guillermo has been with the department for 28 years. With over 20 years of markout and striping experience, Guillermo is a tremendous asset to the paint and sign shop's citywide operations unit. Guillermo excels as a first-level supervisor over crews in markout and striping. He is dedicated to getting the entire workload done and consistently ensures that deadlines are met to ensure public safety. He also communicates exceptionally well with the various engineering groups to resolve issues with complex construction plans. Guillermo's work ethic is exemplary of what the department expects and needs to keep moving Los Angeles forward. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Mr. Rue, Ms. Martinez? All right, well, thank you for the presentation. Congratulations to Stacy and to Guillermo. High five or high 10 to all the accountants in the room. Thank you for everything you do. We actually wouldn't be functioning without you, so thanks for that. Appreciate, again, the monthly recognition you do here. I think it's important to do. We don't do enough of it in the city, and I don't think we can say thank you enough. So thanks very much for
Thank you, Mr.
everything.
Chair.
Yes?
Oh, I just want to do another especially thank you to you and to your department for late last week for dropping everything at the last minute, dropping everything that you were doing to help try to mitigate a potential event that was in my district. Thank you so much for, you mobilized literally in 30 minutes your entire team to try to solve a potential traffic issue that could have been in my district. So I really want to thank you for that.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for the recognition, and those are moments that make me really proud and honored to be part of the team. So thank you.
I'm assuming you didn't drop anything in CD6 or CD5 to accommodate Mr. Rue.
Not that weekend, but you know.
I would have agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and Mr. Chair, it was not just DOT, but it was a coordination of all our different departments, LAPD, DOT, emergency management, all the different teams involved. So that was, it was quite an amazing sight to see our fast response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll now go back to the regular agenda. And we have a number of comment cards. Ms. Ramirez, I will give you 3 minutes for the whole enchilada. And Mr. No Name, you can have 5.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. As you all know, I'm a victim of gang stalking, so I have never a dull day. Item number one, I have had problems with these independent cab companies, like one independent cab, Yellow Cab, Checker Cab, Bell Cab, Fiesta Cab, United Cab, People's Cab, Beverly Hills Cab, and Taxi, and all other cabs. I'm being told secretly that whenever I place my call, I get denied service. Not because I mugged a cab driver, or not because I flattened his tires, or not because I never paid. I always paid my cabs. I've given them tips on top of that. And yet somebody has blackballed me. I don't know if it was Paul Krikorian, yet I don't trust that weasel. So somebody has sabotaged me. So I wait 4 to 10 or 12 hours for a bloody cab. And so I'm angry, and I'm going to find out who is behind these sabotaging me, because no matter what city I'm in, I am denied a cab. No matter where I am, I cannot get a cab to take me or pick me up. I'm blackballed. Having said that, lovely, never a dull day. I'm going to find out who the hell's behind it, because I'm going to go after them. And again, number one, on the cyclists, you've got a lot of belligerent, nasty cyclists, most of them Latino gangbangers and changos, who ride their bicycles at night, make a lot of loud noises, and then they hold and they block the traffic intersections on First and Main and Spring and all the others. And they are so loud, obnoxious, and they're reckless, and they do cause a lot of traffic disturbances. I am worried about that. Somebody needs to tell these jackasses they better slow down, or they're going to kill somebody, or they're going to get killed. Either way, it's a dilemma. And God bless all our traffic cops, because they are, they're doing their job, and God help, because we got a lot of Latino chango gangbangers who are reckless, and God help those good cops. And number 6, We are talking about communication from the mayor, and I don't think we need the amount of $50,000 to fund the city of Los Angeles great streets. We need to deport the illegal wetbacks before we do great streets, equitable development, and healthy communities. It ain't gonna happen as long as you got these wetbacks, gangbangers, and chango assholes all over with their graffiti, their vandalism, home invasion, robberies, gang stalkings, and attacking and hurting people. This happens every night. Again, you heard, nobody walks in LA, walking in LA. Nobody walks in LA. You've got not only Latinos but blacks, and you've got them crawling all over the streets, and they're destroying, defacing, and not only hurting people, but they are destroying city property. I see it all the time at night. I'm up all night. I see it, and I chase a lot of them, and I don't get paid for this. So again, clean up the streets. Send these black thugs to Guantanamo Bay, and send these wetbacks back to Mexico and Latin America. God bless El Jefe Donald Trump.
Thank you. Mr. Name.
Very good. Oh, you said 5 minutes, all right? You're giving me 5 minutes. Can they reset the clock?
5.
Yeah. So, city on fire, absolutely just burning down from corruption. And what we have here is the city of Los Angeles is a municipal corporation. And I thought all you council members were elected. No, you're employees. You're employees of a municipal corporation. So what we're voting for are not board members and controlling parties of the city's municipal corporation. You're mere employees. So who's in control of the city? The bondholders and the creditors. That's who's in charge of the city. You're just the employees. You're taking your orders from somebody else. So you look at this taxi cab commission, you need to abolish the taxi cab commission, and you need to deregulate completely all taxi cab medallion holders. Now, in our city, you don't give them a medallion. In New York City, you do, and the reason you don't give them a medallion is because that you taketh and giveth away at your own leisure. Because this city doesn't follow state law, it doesn't follow federal law. If it would, you would be giving your taxi cabs equal footing with Uber, Lyft, and other ride sharing. But you're restricting these taxi cab owners to 1950s and 40s regulations in a 2016 economy. You're bankrupting our taxi cab holders. And our taxi cab holders of these licenses paid a lot of money, and they paid off a lot of inspectors, and they paid off a lot of politicians to get where they are today, only to have you give unregulated vendors equal access to their business. And I hope the taxi cab people sue the living shit out of the city and get damages because you're putting them out of business by over-regulating them. And it needs to stop. These people work very hard for their money. It's only because they're not white, it's only because most of them are Middle Eastern, Indian, and Eastern European that you treat them like shit. And that's why, because you're nothing but racist. If they were white, if they were Jewish, living in nice homes, you would not be doing what you're doing to these people. So these commissioners should not be serving on a commission that should be abolished. And I mean, they don't want to talk to you about it because they don't come up here and talk because they don't want to have a bunch of inspectors coming out and shutting down their operations. Because when you speak against this city, under your First Amendment rights, your Brown Act rights, you get sabotaged. And then you like to go to court and get these little restraining orders called workplace restraining orders because you are mere employees of the Municipal Corporation of Los Angeles that goes to court and suppresses people's free speech rights in the name of a workplace temporary and permanent restraining order. The problem is over in the Superior Court, you got a lot of shenanigans going around. You got judges signing these orders and not reading and establishing the jurisdiction to do so. Because if you're elected officials, you can't really be employees, can you? But you are just employees. You stated this in court. You are meaningless. You have no power. You're not running anything. Everything's on automatic pilot. and you are sitting there raping and pillaging businesses in this city, including these taxi cab drivers who cannot compete. They must be able to compete against ride sharing. You're not accommodating their needs, and it's got to stop. This is absolute business persecution. And then the rest of this garbage, you don't want people to have hauling licenses. You don't want people to park on streets because they're over 20 feet. In other words, you want to tell people, come to Los Angeles, we'll help you if you're homeless, we'll help you if you're poor, except if you're in CD2, if you're in CD4, CD5, CD11, CD5. Then you can't park on our streets. But if you're in the dumping grounds of CD8, CD9, and especially Nuri's District 6 and 7, you can park, you can live on the streets, you can sell drugs, you can have prostitutes, you can do all of this criminality except in the rich white districts. This city is apartheid. It is ran on an apartheid model, and it's got to stop. And then your council president likes to do business with the de Klerk family. Oh, South Africa? You have a lot of things you need to explain, but you are treating the businesses, you are treating legitimate operators like total crap. It's a war against businesses, and it needs to stop.
Okay, so the rest of the members of the audience will be refunding those 5 minutes of your life back later. We will now go to item number 1.
Item number 1 is a communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Mr. Eric Spiegelman to the Board of Taxi Cab Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2021.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Fantastic.
So, well, I guess I've seen you at this committee before. This committee has been composed differently since last time you were here. So for the benefit of the other members, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've done on the commission for the past couple years and why you're interested in continuing.
Sure. So my name is Eric Spiegelman. I'm a lawyer by trade. I was appointed to this commission 2 years ago, and it immediately became one of the more fulfilling things that I've ever been able to be a part of. My commission has spent the past 2 years trying to lighten the burden faced by taxi companies so that they can compete more fairly with Uber and Lyft in ways in which the city hasn't been able to directly lighten their load. We have encouraged them to come forward and ask us what would help them out, and also encourage them to adopt internal changes that would make them more competitive with Uber and Lyft.
Okay. I should note from my experience with you over the past couple years, you have been incredibly thoughtful, remarkably engaged, creative in your thinking. I think you've been a tremendous asset to the commission and to the city.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. David or Nuri, do either of you have any questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
No. Thank you. And it looks like you have a very great experience with all this new media, new technology, which will come in handy. So you, and you have the experience already at the commission, and look forward to your assistance in helping us modernize our taxi.
I look forward to helping as well. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much. So the direction of this committee will be to recommend to the full council your approval.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I should also note I'd like to recommend we move items 3, 4, 5, and 6 on consent. Any objections? All right, so with that objection, that's the order of the committee. That brings us to item number 2.
Item number 2 is a communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Mr. Rudy Espinoza to the Board of Transportation Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2021.
Welcome back.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you again as well. Again, for the benefit of the members of the committee, please tell us a bit about yourself and what you've done so far and what you're looking forward to doing.
Sure. My name is Rudy Espinoza. I'm an urban planner. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit community development organization based in Boyle Heights called Learn. And a lot of the work that I do there is overseeing our advocacy work and our economic development initiatives to support micro-entrepreneurs. I'm a huge booster of the city, and I try to take that energy to the Department of Transportation and the Commission. A lot of the work that we've done together is really advising the department as much as possible to ensure that any resources that are funneled through the department to support our streets are supporting low-income neighborhoods, and the folks are included. And I've had a really great time, and I'm honored to serve, and I'd love to continue.
Great. Mr. Rue or Ms. Martinez?
Thank you for your
All
service.
right. I'd like to ask you to stick around and pay attention to item 8 on today's agenda, if you can. It's about enforcement of speed limits in the city of Los Angeles. It's an issue that I'd love to engage your commission on more, and have your minds wrapping around the problem and helping us get to a solution.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So without objection, we will recommend your approval as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is a Bon and Buscaino motion relative to directing LADOT to report on city regulations, processes, and procedures relative to haul trucks and the staging and parking of haul trucks in the city right-of-way.
Thank you. Colleagues, I introduced this motion due to a pretty bad problem in my district. I imagine it's a problem in many others. It's particularly acute in my district because it's a problem the city does nothing about and other jurisdictions do quite a bit about. And as a result, the impacts in parts of Los Angeles that adjoin other jurisdictions, particularly that have a lot of construction, feel an impact. And that's about vehicles that are idling, waiting to do removal of debris for haul routes and construction sites. In my particular instance, the city of Santa Monica requires a permit for such a thing, and as a result, nobody gets a permit in Santa Monica. They park on Lincoln Boulevard and idle their trucks all morning long before dawn, waking people up, putting emissions and pollution into the street, sometimes idling in the middle of the street, and it's been a huge problem, and it's unfair to folks in LA that we don't do the same thing that a lot of our neighboring cities do. So what this motion does is ask a number of the city departments to work together to come up with a system, perhaps a permit system like they have in Santa Monica or in other jurisdictions, so that we can actually regulate all these idling trucks in the city of Los Angeles. So what the motion does is it asks DOT, Building and Safety, and Bureau of Street Services to work together on some recommendations for this committee. I'm going to ask CLA to lead that process. And what I want to be very specific about in the ask is that when folks report back in 60 days, it is a report about how we can do this and not about why we can't do this. Because it can be done in other jurisdictions, it can be done here. So anybody have any questions?
No, I just wanted to strongly support your motion. I mean, this is a huge nuisance in my district as well. And a couple of months ago, back in February, I challenged my staff and the city staff as well, and we came up with a construction overlay zone. Mm-hmm. And it was actually derived from, and I love your motion because it's more inclusive of everything. I'm also on the Public Works Committee, and they gave us a report on those trash bins. Like it's almost a truck size that they put out. And it's very ununiform here in the city of LA. And we started looking, in my office started looking into why that's the case. And it turns out that we allow any vendors to do it, while other cities have a list of specific vendors. Now that prompted the question, and especially in hillsides where there's substandard streets under 20 feet, just a couple of trucks, it makes it even more exacerbated. So we've came up with the construction overlay zone, which planning department is working with all these different departments on. So if I could somehow maybe add or direct the department to work with the planning department and everyone else who's already looking at this as well, because it's similar yet different. So the more inclusive, and if it means we follow some of the other cities' models where they have uniform permitting for what kind of bins could be out there, how we enforce it, and it's a great opportunity. So.
Well, my issue in the district has just been ongoing. Since most of the heavy industry, if not some of the largest landfills, are located in my district, our issues are just sort of how we grew up with idling trucks in our neighborhoods day in and day out. So my question is more about what are we doing to enforce our codes in the city to go after some of these semis that are just persistently in and out of our neighborhoods. It's an ongoing issue for us, so this isn't new. I'm certainly sensitive to the fact that other jurisdictions are pushing the problem into the city of Los Angeles, which is pretty much kind of like the trend nowadays. It seems like everything gets pushed into the city, and we do absolutely nothing about it. And so I'm glad that you're taking the initiative, but I would like to have a broader conversation about this task force and how we can also help communities who have been living with this issue for 30, 40 years. So at a broader scale, so.
Okay. So let's have this report back in 60 days, and then we can have the broader discussion as well.
Mr. Chair, maybe they could also include what other cities do as an example, so we could.
Yes, I'd like them to look at that because it's certainly doable.
Right. Because I know, like, for these trash bins, one of the because enforcement's a huge problem. And for the trash bins, the way they do enforcement is if you have a permit, you have the ability to tow away those illegal trash bins that aren't permitted. So it's almost the city doesn't enforce, the vendors do. So that's an innovative way.
So we do have, in my district, there are no idling signs, there's postings. The problem is we don't have enough enforcement.
Right.
That tends to be the issue here, is even if you put together a permitting process, do we have the staff that's going to be able to handle that process? That is what is so frustrating and serving, is that we enact these laws, but often we don't have the manpower to be able to enforce them. And so in my district, a lot of times, the signs are up there that says that the tonnage and the no idling signs are there. We just don't have anybody that can proactively be out there enforcing that. So I think that's part of the issue, too.
So with that in mind, let's also ask the CAO to engage on the report. Still leave Mr. Smith from the CLA's office as chief quarterback of the effort, but we need to, I think, pull the CAO in as well. Great.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, if I could just, actually, that's the enforcement issue. We've been working with the CAO, and actually Building and Safety was the first department that was able to jump on board. We're trying to look at, and it's so preliminary right now, we haven't even introduced the motion, but having a portion of the fine, because whenever we call Building and Safety or parking enforcement, or whoever we call, they come back and tell us, which is the truth. It's not an excuse that they don't have enough staff. They don't have enough manpower. So we're trying to work with the CAO to see if there's some way where a portion of the, well, first reevaluate all the fines, because sometimes it's so low, but see if a portion of those fines could go back to the department, especially the enforcement mechanism, to see how it could self-fund. So they can have more resources. But we're working with City Attorney's Office, and I'd love, once we get more answers, I'd love to bring a motion and have you guys co-author.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so without objection, the direction of the committee is for a report back in 60 days, all the departments I mentioned, CLA, CAO, DOT, Bureau of Street Services, Building and Safety. Thank you very much. So that brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is a DOT report in response to a Bonin, Englander, Buscaino motion relative to enhanced speed enforcement and tools to reduce speeding.
Okay, so we have a number of folks who are coming to the table to report on this. I believe Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Gale, Lieutenant Ferry, and Nader, all coming up. Huh? There's no public comment for this one. So, colleagues, this is an issue that I think most members of the committee are familiar with, is we have a huge problem and a crisis in the city regarding enforcing speed limits. And the state makes it very complicated because periodically we need to conduct studies to determine if the speed limit should be set the way it is, and often results in the way the analysis is set up. It often results in speed limits having to be raised. So a number of our communities are reluctant to have their speed limits raised. On the other hand, when the studies are not done and the studies have expired, LAPD isn't allowed to enforce the speed limit on our streets. And I think in the report, staff will detail just how widespread this problem is and what percentage of our streets, particularly streets in our high injury network, have expired or expiring studies and just are not subject to enforcement. And Mr. Englander's actually been looking into this for a while. And there's a couple things we need to do. One, it would be nice if we could get some state legislative relief so that we didn't have to either do the studies as frequently or didn't have to be compelled to potentially raise the speed limit if the speed is going faster than what it had been set for. But the other was this motion, which asked for DOT and LAPD to work together and report to this committee in public safety on what the current impediments are, what can be done about it, and whether or not we can do some potential pilot projects in order to get things moving. And I think part of what's key to this is if we're going to be updating the studies and we are going to be changing the speed limits in certain neighborhoods, it's not enough to just do that. There has to be actual genuine commitment from the relevant city agencies, those at the table, to do some actual consistent enforcement in those areas so that there's an actual payoff for the communities. So who'd like to go first in making the report?
Great. So first, thank you very much for allowing us to come together today and give you this presentation. I have to say that setting speed limits in the state of California is one of the most technical, counterintuitive, but also influential pieces of what we do in transportation. And I want to recognize the strong partnership that we've had from LAPD, both in Vision Zero and in wrestling with this particular issue. As you'll see, we have a short presentation we'll go through, and then I'll pass it along to others, and then we'll take questions. But as you'll see as we go through, these are tough conversations with communities. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've had somebody ask me to just put up a sign to lower the speed limit. And I think that the presentation you'll see here does an excellent job of just explaining that first of all, it's not possible, and second of all, it doesn't work. And so we're faced with really tough decisions. So as you recall, the city's Vision Zero effort is co-chaired by LADOT and LAPD. Speed is one of the primary dominant factors that causes crashes, and in fact, for all users, people driving, walking, or biking, unsafe speed is a primary collision factor for 40% of the crashes that happen on the high injury network. And that's to say nothing of the crashes, injuries, and fatalities where unsafe speed is a secondary factor. If we could get everybody in the city to slow down to a safe speed, we could save hundreds of lives every year. So with that, I'm going to just invite Officer Williams up to walk through a presentation. This is Officer Troy Williams. I'll let him introduce himself, and then Chief Green and I and Nader and Nat will take it from there.
Great.
Thank you, Selena. Good afternoon. Thank you for having the opportunity to let me present this information to you today. I'm going to keep it short. I know we like things that go quick.
So let me just ask the clerk, is he close enough to a microphone for the record?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem, sir. So, Vision Zero, in order to meet the goal of Vision Zero by 2025, to have zero for traffic fatalities, one of the biggest things that we need to focus on is speed. And I work at a traffic division, and the traffic divisions have a unit called Community Traffic Services Unit. And this is a unit that receives and investigates traffic complaints. And our number one chief complaint is speeding. So what I'm going to talk about real quick is our ability to enforce speed and also our lack of ability to enforce speed. So when we talk about speeding, keep your eye on this arrow right here. You'll see the aftermath of what happens when a motorist is speeding down Sepulveda Boulevard.
Oh.
Yep.
This was a 5-car collision with 6 people injured. This is an aerial shot from the news media. There's the 5 cars that were involved. And 6 people were injured, 1 critically. And this was on a street that has an expired survey. And the motorist was actually spotted a mile south of this location, traveling at a high rate of speed, at a place where our motor officers would have normally been at and probably could have prevented this tragedy. So when it comes to speeding, these are the 2 cars that were involved. This guy was just sitting at the light.
Yeah.
When this person lost control, hit him head on and knocked him back over 150 feet. And luckily, he survived too. So collisions don't just happen, they're caused. They're caused by drivers doing something illegal, such as speeding. So in order to enforce speed, we have some rules we have to follow. But why is speed such an issue? So let me talk real quick about stopping distance. If you look at the stopping distance chart, and let's just talk about 60 miles an hour, and that will come to make sense in a few more minutes. If a car is going 60 miles per hour, there's a thing called perception and reaction time. And that's how long it takes somebody to perceive and react to trouble, such as a car turning in front of them, a person crossing the street, maybe even a child chasing a ball in the roadway. So that's how far they're going to go before they even get on the brakes, once they perceive and react to it. Then you add the 171 feet of braking. That's where the car is actually engaged in braking and bringing the car to a stop. You add them together, you have 300 feet. And that's the approximate stopping distance for 60 miles per hour. And that's considering normal conditions, dry, surface, street, things of that nature. So we know what 300 feet represents. Everybody knows what a football field looks like. In fact, pretty soon we'll be able to go right over here and watch the Rams play, right? So let's pretend we're at the arena watching the Rams play. This is the mark of 132 feet. Here's the car reaching the end zone. It's going to travel this far before they even get on the brakes. If somebody were to pull out, turn, or do anything in this football field, then to get on the brakes, they're going to take that far. So they're going to go from end zone to end zone at 60 miles an hour to bring that car to a safe stop. If they're going around 40 miles an hour, they could bring the car to a stop well before the 50-yard line. So that's our goal, is to focus on keeping people not driving these excessive speeds. So that whole area is a danger zone now. Any conflicts that happen, that could potentially be a catastrophic event. So how do we enforce speed? Well, our primary enforcement tool is the laser. Most of us grew up with the term radar, right? Speed, enforced by radar. Radar was sending out radio waves, and it measured the speed of everything moving out there. And it was up to the officer using the radar to determine which vehicle was traveling at that speed. Now with laser, or LiDAR, light detection and ranging, it's a target-specific device, so it's very safe. We can actually measure the speed of a vehicle 1,000 feet away. With radar, it'd be 100 feet away, and then we'd have to chase them. And chase them down the street a ways before we can get the vehicle safely stopped. Now we can measure the speed 100,000 feet away, and we even stop them before they reach my location. So what this officer's doing is looking through a heads-up display. This is what they look at. They see that little circle, they put it on the car they're interested in. This car going down the street, 59 miles an hour, in a 35 zone. Come back, 61, this white car's pulling out. Now he's slamming on the brakes, scrubbing off speed. Luckily, this white car got out of the way, but if you back up a split second, 61 miles an hour in a 35 zone, there is no business anyone needs to drive that fast. And that's where the enforcement branch of the police department comes into play. We target that type of aggressive driving. And we also do education as well. We educate community members on the ability to stop their vehicles and why it's unsafe to drive at these speeds. But in order to do this enforcement, as Councilman Bonneman mentioned already about the requirements of the surveys, we have to follow these rules and these laws. Even though we're a police department, we still have to follow laws, okay? So the law says these surveys are only valid for up to 10 years. At 10-year mark, they have to be reevaluated no matter what. So when they go back and get reevaluated, the page out of the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Device, which is the standard on how they set speed limits and do anything with traffic engineering, states that one, it should be set at the 85th percentile. And I'll talk about what that means in just a second. Then it says they cannot be set arbitrarily low. Just like you were saying that sometimes, I hear this all the time, people say, why don't they just post the street at 25, a major street? We can't do that, and there's reasons why. And then at the bottom is they have to be conducted by an engineering study. So I can't make a decision as a radar coordinator to say, let's post it at this. DOT can't say we should post it here. And community members who live in that environment can't just say we want it posted really low. Because having it low doesn't make motorists drive that speed. And the only way to keep a speed limit low is through heavy, heavy enforcement. So why are we here? Well, basically it comes down to this. These three terms right here, we're going to talk about critical speed. They all mean the same thing. And they simply mean this, that when an engineering study is conducted by the Department of Transportation, 85% of the traffic is traveling at or below a given speed. So that, for example, let's say the critical speed is 43 miles an hour. So we have a critical speed, which is very common speed here in the city of Los Angeles, 43 miles per hour. So history, prior to 2009, there was a change in the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which simply said the speed limit has to be posted at the nearest 5 mile per increment. But in 2012, they allowed for a rounding down, which I'll come to in a second, but they won't allow us for a 5 mile per reduction. And this will all make sense in about one slide. Right now, you're all looking at me like, what the is he talking about? It all come together in about one slide. So let's go back to prior to 2009. 2009, we had a critical speed of 43 miles per hour. That means that DOT was allowed to go to the next lowest 5 mile per increment, which would be 40. Then they could do a 5 mile per deduction based on things like hazards not readily apparent to the driver and other conditions as collision rates. Then we ended up with a 35-mile posting. Currently, with the same critical, because of that change in 2009, the speed limit now has to be posted at the nearest 5-mile per increment. Well, in this case, 45 is higher than 43. That would cause the speed limit to be posted higher than the 85th percentile. So therefore, that's that 2012 change that allows for rounding down. So now they can round down, but now once they round down, they're not allowed to do the 5-mile per reduction. So what happens is, you look at the same critical speeds from prior to 2009 to now, and this requires an increase to be 40 miles an hour for us to be able to enforce it. So when we look at it that way, we think that raising the speed limit doesn't necessarily mean raising speeds. So the reaction a lot of times I get from community members is this raising speed limits is going to raise speeds. And there's an emotional response that if you raise the speed limit, people are going to drive faster. This is a 48-state study, 10 years in the making, talking about that effect. And here's a page out of that book right here. And if you look at that red line, that's the critical speed, or 85th percentile, and there's plus 1 mile an hour, 2 miles an hour. So if you look at the blue lines, that's saying that the speed limit was raised 5, 10, or 15 miles an hour, or it was lowered 5, 10, or 15 miles per hour. But the 85th percentile of traffic didn't even change by 1 full mile per hour. So that misunderstanding that if you raise the speed limit 5 miles an hour, the critical is going to go up 5 miles an hour. If you raise it 15, it's going to go up 15. This is a great example of how that doesn't happen. Because in an environment like LA, for example, we have too many things that conflict with that, such as traffic signals and congestion and things that don't just give us the free rein. If I'm on the 40 going to Vegas and you raise the speed limit to 80, yeah, I'd go 90. You raise it to 90, I'll go 100. But I don't have to stop at lights all the time. I don't have traffic crossing the street. I don't have pedestrians and bicyclists, things I got to worry about and share the road with. Out on an open highway, that argument would apply. But on a surface street, that argument doesn't hold water.
Can I ask you a question on that? I understand that. It doesn't make intuitive sense to me. It certainly doesn't make intuitive sense to my constituents. But I understand what you're saying. And that's what the data is showing. And I can understand what you're saying if I'm thinking of Venice Boulevard or Broadway or Main Street or something like that, that has a lot of traffic lights and that has a lot of traffic. But what I often get complaints about is speeding through residential neighborhoods. And they don't have the traffic lights and stuff like that. And it's where you have the risk of the kid who's running out, chasing the ball and stuff like that. Does that, what keeps the speed lower than posted in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of traffic lights on a more residential street?
Well, residential streets, you don't have very many long straightaways before you're going to end up at a stop sign. So a stop sign is your traffic light. So there's not a lot of places where you're going to have super long stretches. The other thing what happens with residential streets is they're narrow generally. So the narrow effect gives it a more uncomfortable feeling to go fast. It's like you're driving through a tunnel and everything's just going by really fast. So there are a couple of good examples there. Did I help?
Well, I can think of the street immediately 1 block north of where I live where the north-south has stop signs, but the east-west doesn't. Mm-hmm. And the east-west gets a lot of fast traffic.
And that's a street that could be surveyed.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it's a residential street, and generally residential streets have 25 miles per hour under 22.352 of the Vehicle Code says, unless otherwise posted, it's deemed 25 miles an hour. If it's a street such that has the volume or has the speeds higher, DOT can put that on the list and do an evaluation and then maybe post it, 30, but that gives us the authority to enforce it as well. Because if it's not posted, there's a lot of checks and balances on when we can enforce speed limits and when we can't. But if there's a survey, that gives us the automatic ability to enforce the speed limit. There are exceptions. For example, school zones don't require an engineering traffic survey. So, and also maximum limits. So if somebody's going 70 miles an hour down Venice Boulevard, I don't need a survey. If they're going through a school zone when children are present, we don't have to have a survey because the children are protected based that 25 miles an hour is considered the maximum safe speed no matter what. So there are a couple exceptions, but the majority of our traffic complaints are on streets that are multi-lane highways or in residential areas that are considered collector or streets, so we need that ability.
If I may, Councilman Martin, the other thing that comes into place, how it's enforced. And without the survey, you can't use laser. And so I think later on we'll have a discussion of laser versus the old techniques and what motor cops have to do, and that is very impractical on small residential streets.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. So how does this how does this factor into whether you can justify a traffic signal or not? For example, I have a school in Arleta whose parents are very, very determined to try to get a traffic signal there.
Oh, at Arleta and Montague?
You've been there?
Yes.
It's Vina Elementary School, which is great. I mean, they're great parents, and they're, of course, are scared to death to cross Arleta Avenue because of the high speed of traffic. But how does this factor in, because it's a school zone, and I think we've been out there twice. You just gave a final determination on the latest survey, which now calls for a traffic signal. But so how does this determine whether we can fast track, or does it play any factor in determining whether?
That's a better question for.
It's a different set of warrants.
I'm sorry, say
It's
that
a
again?
different set of warrants.
Okay.
So it's totally different. So this is just related to
Increasing the speed?
data that we collect in order to set the speed limit. When we decide whether or not to put in a signal, there's a totally separate set of warrants that governs that decision. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that makes sense. I just was
Okay.
wondering if you used any of this data to make that determination or not. Because that intersection, I think you've been out there twice already.
Yeah, we put the radar trailer out there to capture the data to give us the average and the critical speeds. And it's posted 40 miles per hour, and the critical was still right around.
I mean, people go down that street at 70.
Yeah. And that's the same scenario that we
Right.
hear everywhere. And right now, our ability to work Arleta is compromised. Until we get a survey that justifies that speed limit, which it already is, we can't even go out and work it. The only time, and that Arleta is not a school zone. Montague is the school zone. So we can't even go out and use the school zone exception on Arleta until we get a survey.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just clarify that? So for a school zone, you don't need to do the survey. You could just post 25, you could use radar enforcement, laser enforcement, ticket, all of that, right?
Correct. When children are present outside the school ground, the campus, they have to be like on the sidewalk, but if they're behind the fence or in the classroom, then they're protected, and then we can't use, at that time, we cannot enforce it with that exception.
It's not 24 hours a day,
No,
7 days
it's
a
not
week?
24 hours.
So it's only if there's a child out there?
Basically, it's like to and from, when they're coming to and from, or they're
Oh,
on
okay.
recess. Unless, for example, in the valley, there's a school at Tampa and Lassen that has the lockers facing the Lassen. So when they're out between classes.
Nobel Middle School.
Right.
Nobel.
So I can't remember my DMV test, but isn't residential areas 35 miles?
No, it's
20,
25.
25.
For schools? No, I'm saying residential.
Residential
Residential is 25.
It's 25. But
Residential and business districts
Are 25.
unless.
default, unless otherwise posted.
unless otherwise posted. So for residential areas, is it 20? Do you still need a speed survey?
And there's one exception, it's called a local street or road, and if it's on the California road map system as a local street or road, then we can work that traffic complaint without a survey.
Without a survey. So,
Without a survey.
so a regular neighborhood, residential neighborhood, with or without a school, is 25, but you can't give a ticket.
It has to be on the California road map system or survey. And when you look at it, it's a lot of short little streets. It's not very often that it will be on the California road map system as a local street and be long enough or have an issue. And a lot of streets that go into residential neighborhoods are called like collector streets. They're kind of the street that gets you into the neighborhood and then you branch off. Well, you think of it as a residential street, but it's not a local street as far as the law is concerned.
And those streets need a survey.
Yes. So speaking of surveys, right now, as of December of last year, we're at 75% of the surveyed streets in the city of Los Angeles are expired. And I understand that over 81% of the streets that are on the high injury network are expired. And by the end of this year, we're going to be in 80s here as well. We only have one page of enforceable streets in the San Fernando Valley out of 3,000 street miles, whereas 5 years ago, we had 6 pages of enforceable streets. And our number one complaint, and we get councilmember complaints as well, I'm sure your staff gets calls of every constituent saying, hey, they're speeding and the police can't do anything about it, and that's one of the reasons why. 5 years ago, it was the other way around. It was 25% were expired, 75% were enforceable. But when that change in law came in 2009 and they started dropping off, started expiring, that's where we started getting into this scenario. In the same 5-year period, we've had an 83% decrease in speed enforcement because the officers can't use the laser to enforce speed because it would be illegal. So the streets where we had complaints or where we had problems or where we had speeding, we have to just say we've got to go somewhere else. And that's kind of like the drought. The lake's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and we can only go into that lake to do enforcement. And then the same time frame during the last 5 years, in the city of Los Angeles, we've had a 20% increase in fatality traffic collisions from 167 to over 200 now in that same time frame. So the correlation between the surveys expiring and the enforcement dropping off, the collision rate and the death rate has gone up. So in order to meet Vision Zero's expectations by 2025, we're going the wrong direction. So that's the explanation. So why are we here? Well, basically it's because of that change in law in 2009. It actually started in 2004, but 2009 is when it came to a head. And what the resistance to adopting speed limits is just trying to inform the community why speed limits need to be changed, so it doesn't seem like it's just out of nowhere, let's just raise speed limits. In some cases, even when lowering the speed limit, there was some resistance. The other thing is with LADOT staff reductions, as they lost personnel, because the surveying process is very complicated and time-consuming, and then it's got to go through all the checks and balances to get all the way to here before it goes to the next level. Even then, they were still expiring faster than the renewal rate. So with that, our ability as a police department to enforce speed, our hands have basically been tied to enforce speed unless it meets one of the exceptions, which is very rare. So the bottom line is LADOT and LAPD, our goal is we're in the business of saving lives. And in order to do that, we have engineering, education, and the last stop gap is enforcement. So right now we've lost our enforcement arm of that pyramid. Thank you very much.
So I just want to sort of highlight a couple things. You know, one is this is not easy to explain, and I think Officer Williams's presentation does an excellent job of distilling something that is very complicated into something that's relatively easy to understand. I think the takeaway point around the number, just the sheer volume of expired surveys that we have is probably the one thing that we'd want people to remember. We did share with each of your offices our willingness to go out and do some education in the community, help people understand that you know, if they start to see the speed limit signs going up, why that is and what's happening. But without enforcement as a tool to pair with engineering and education, we're going to struggle a great deal to meet our goal. I did want to turn it over to Nader Asmar just for a few moments to cover some things related to LADOT's role.
Yes, Nader Asmar, Principal Transportation Engineer with LADOT. One of my groups that I'm in charge of is the survey group that prepares the speed surveys for the city, and we work with LADOT very closely. One of the things we're doing is we've had problems with staffing since 2008 or so. When the Great Recession hit, we've lost a number of our staff. At one point we had 7 individuals working on preparing these surveys, but now we're down to 3 people. So we did request in the budget to increase our staffing as part of this Vision Zero effort. We did receive funding for two new aid positions in order to increase our output of speed surveys, which is great. Additionally, we did ask for some money to be able to hire a bench consultant to help us increase our output of speed surveys. We did receive money in the budget for about $200,000 to do that. So what we're doing is we're going to prioritize the high injury network. Any streets that are on the high injury network will become our top priority. And we're going to use all those things to try to increase the output that we bring to you as well. In addition, we are cross-training some staff from another section to help us fill in the gaps in the meantime until we can hire the new staff. But we should be able to bring them on board near July 1st. So the speed limits that do not change as we go through this effort do not require us to come to get any approval. We can just renew the existing speed limit. And that'll be I think that'll be most of the streets. It's the ones that do change that we have to come and present to you for some administrative action. Additionally,
Based on the stuff that you've just been saying about
Yes.
personnel, the money in the budget and all that, that would get us from 75% expired down to what?
well, my goal is to get to 100% of the high injury network within a year to 2 years, which is very ambitious because it's going to involve a lot of teamwork and it has to go through our district offices as well as you folks. But that's my goal.
So and that's a phenomenal goal. There's two metrics I'm curious about. One is you answered my unasked second question before I had a chance to ask it. But the first one is what percentage of the 75% would that get us down to after a year and then after 2 years?
Well, the high injury network is about 45% of the city miles that have speed surveys. And so the thing that's hard to say is because they expire, they're constantly expiring. Like in the month of March, we had a number of surveys that expired all at the same time. So it's kind of up and down, and we'd have to look forward to see what would expire in the future. But right now, the focus is to get that high injury network enforceable as quickly as possible.
Mr. Chair, I want to lead with a different question. So once you do update the network and you update the surveys, my question still is, you're going to have enough money or resources to enforce? I think we're back in square one if you're busy updating, which is great, but you have no money to enforce the speed limit. I don't see how this helps us.
I would pass that over to our colleagues, Chief Green, LAPD.
I mean, the enforcement piece and having the resources to do that is everything.
So a couple things. Our first piece would be education, to get out to the community. And for those of you that don't know, Bob Green, I'm a Commanding Officer Operation Valley Bureau, and I speak for all four of the bureau chiefs. This really became on my radar. I left South LA with the Valley about a year and a half ago. And I saw that traffic deaths outpaced homicides in the Valley. And I had been in an environment that was all about homicides, and so it was shocking. So our plan, once we identified this, a great partnership with DOT, is to do the education piece through the neighborhood councils, the neighborhood watches, get out to community meetings, and really educate the public that this is coming. And then I have all the resources I need to do the enforcement. So you might ask, well, how come motor cops aren't out doing traditional enforcement of pacing vehicles? In a little historical perspective, we killed more motor cops in the LAPD than any other job classification of a police officer. And that's because for years, they would chase speeders down on their motors, and they'd accelerate to somebody that's doing 60 to 70, 80 miles an hour to catch up to him, and then try and pace him for a couple of blocks to get into court. And during that, we've got people that pull out and turn left in front of them. So we were killing and critically injuring officers at a very, very high rate. Our last motor officer that was killed, Van Johnson, in 1997, he was chasing a speeder and somebody turned in front of him and he was killed. So we recalibrated our enforcement posture to look at technology, and that's when we went from radar to really pushing laser technology. Not only does laser make it much, much safer for the community and for the police officer to do traffic enforcement, but also when it comes to court, you've got that evidence right there that you can hand to a judge. It really facilitates the process much, much quicker. It's not dependent on an officer's testimony or his credibility. You've got technology that makes it work. And so I currently have the resources to do aggressive enforcement, but I need the tools to do it. So without the current tools, it leaves the motor officers in a position where they'd have to go back out to where we were 20 years ago and chase speeders down. And I'm not an advocate of that at all. I don't think it's healthy for the community or for motor officers. So that's why this is a crisis for us. When I look at the numbers, and we've dropped 85,000 tickets, since this annually, since this came into play. And this year, with all our efforts for Vision Zero, with re-engineering and education, we're still 26% up citywide in traffic deaths. Last year at this time, I had either 1 or 0 bicycle deaths, and I've already got 2. We had 2 all of last year. I'm not even halfway through the year, and I've got 2 bicyclists that have been killed in collisions. A lot of it's speed. Everything we talked a little about, speed may be 40% of the primary cause, but especially in the San Fernando Valley, and on the big streets, Los Angeles, Venice, Culver, those streets, Lincoln, those streets, almost everything involves speed, whether it's a left turn, running a red light, people are going too fast to respond, and so it all involves speed. This is the one thing that we could do that would dramatically decrease the threat to the traveling public, is to get our speed enforcement under control.
I just want to underscore what you said. You're saying you have the resources to do the enforcement, you just don't have the the legal authority and the tools to do it.
Correct.
Certainly not properly.
You
got
didn't
motor
lose
officers-
personnel, you lost speed surveys.
I'm sorry. Once I had the speed surveys,
Right.
I've got the enforcement personnel. I've got the motors. I've got the technology. They are ready to go.
And is that, when you were saying that you were speaking for all 4 bureaus, when you say that, is that true for all 4 bureaus as well?
Correct. That's true.
No, he only speaks for the valley.
I appreciate that.
Come on.
Now,
want to help you.
clearly, the valley, this is the biggest issue because of the length and the width of the streets. And that's why it's such a big challenge.
But
this,
Chief, I want to say something else. You're absolutely right. I think we definitely need a comprehensive plan that includes the public education piece, the engineering, which I think we're already doing by eliminating some lanes and doing what we need to do on that front. And then, of course, the traffic enforcement. But what is DOT doing to help with the education piece? I appreciate what you're saying because you guys have led in that discussion in the community meetings, but what is the department doing to help enhance the public education? And I just have such a hard time. How do you teach people to have conscience? How do you tell someone that when you run someone over or you, God forbid, you run over a kid, that you stop and render help? I mean, to me, it's mind-boggling. I don't know what kind of society we're becoming when we need to tell people you need to stop and render help. But, I mean, taking me back to my original question, how do you lend support on the education front?
Sure. So Vision Zero is the secret sauce of Vision Zero is the collaboration among departments and organizations that haven't partnered previously. Mm-hmm. And so there is, as part of Vision Zero, we have a task force, and that task force has a group that is just focused on the education component of Vision Zero. And around that table, we have people from LA Unified, we have people from the County Department of Public Health, we have people from nonprofit and advocacy groups, we have the Department of Transportation, because we recognize that, in the past, the department from time to time, and this is true of cities all over the U.S., will run a one-off education campaign, Watch the Road. You can still see those signs around the city. We're very proud of that, but that's not nearly enough. And so we know that we can't get there unless we have partners from both the public and private sector working on this. The other thing we're doing over the next 6 months or so is working with a firm to create a campaign that we hope we'll be able to launch in 2017, because we're trying to get to a 20% reduction in 2017. So we know that, that skill set is something that we need to bring to the table. So we're investing in that, bringing those folks to the table through a grant that we got from the state in order to develop a robust campaign that we can get out there to people, whether it's focused around hit and run, which is an epidemic in this city, or some other sort of behavior that we really want to try and raise awareness around. The thing that really, more than anything else, dictates the speed on the street is the design of that street, and also the sort of attitude with which we approach the responsibility of driving a car. Mm-hmm. And so engineering is one part, is the design piece of it, but education enforcement coupled together is really the other piece.
And now we're also becoming the road rage capital of the country. I'm not sure if you're following that story in terms of people literally physically assaulting each other once someone cuts someone off, and it's sort of like, take out your gun, we're going to take care of it today. Yeah. Unbelievable. But thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you for that line of questioning. I do want to ask again, though, about the question I was asking Nader. We saw the stat, big red numbers, 75% expired. You mentioned it's hard to say right now, given what resources we have, what we would get to at the end of the fiscal year, because so many more might be expiring. How soon can I get? I think it's important for us as a committee to know sort of the metrics of where we might be going, both generally overall and on the high injury network streets. What would it take to figure that out, and how soon could we get that?
I can work on that as soon as I get back to the office. I should be able to give you some better information on that within a couple of days at the most.
Okay, all right. But the goal again, 45% of the expired streets are high injury network?
No, 45% of all the miles of speed surveys that we have to do in the city, all of them, 45% of them are on the high injury network.
Okay. we know what percentage of the expired ones are high injury network?
Yes. 23%.
23%. Okay. So are we, when you say you want to, in the next year or two, get all of the high injury ones done, are we doing things, we're not doing anything about a high injury network segment that isn't going to expire for 4 more years, right? We're going to be doing one of the expired streets before we do that?
Exactly. And there's also some that we can do a 3-year extension for, which if the conditions don't change, we can go from 7, to 10 years. And there's some of those are the ones we're focusing on right now because they're very easy to do for us.
Right.
Unless we've added bike lanes or something that changes the roadway.
Right.
If it hasn't changed, we can extend those, and that's what we're doing as well.
Okay. And getting to all of the expired high injury network surveys by the end of a year or two, that's a big difference. Where really do we think we're likely to come out there? Closer to a year or closer to 2 years?
I would say probably closer to 2 years because part of that is getting a consultant on board that we've never had to do that before in LADOT to do this function. So this is a new thing that we need to establish a relationship with them and make sure that whatever we get is of good quality based on what we do normally. So I just want to have that, just make sure that we're doing them the right way. And
the consultant would be performing the surveys?
Right. Yes, part of the surveys. We're going to also be doing them in-house.
Okay. All right. Mr. Rue?
Yeah. Just to be absolutely clear, I mean, Mr. Chair, you were asking the same questions I was going to ask. So it looks like based on your formula, 75% are expired, and you could do 45% of them in about a year. So in about 2.5 years, you should get through all the list.
Well, but the list is going to continue to grow.
Well, continue to grow
Right,
as
so,
well.
so
right.
if the backlog stayed static,
Right.
then,
The current backlog would take about 2.5 years.
Correct.
So obviously, you guys have a protocol, right? Like obviously high injury expired go first, which is about 23%. Then you'll get to the expired, as well as if another high injury network expires, that'll of course go first in line. And then once you finish the high injury expired, then you'll just go to expired non-high injury, and then on and on, right? I'm sure you guys have a protocol on that, right?
Yes.
So another quick question. 2009, so prior to 2009 or prior to 2004, there was no expiration?
No, there was an expiration, but
There's
What's
always
the
been an
difference?
expiration.
There's always
You've
been an
always had to go out and update these.
What was the difference?
but the big difference was the ability to use engineering judgment to reduce the speed limit down an additional 5 miles per hour.
There used to be an ability that, and based on land use or engineering judgment, that you could lower by 5 miles an hour. And that went away. And so that's part of, looking ahead, even though it has been extremely difficult and controversial, trying to see if there are ways that cities can come to the table in Sacramento and get that law changed, so to recognize the challenge that we have in urban environments.
I think the other thing to recognize, when you go from 35 to 40, although it's an increase, those aren't the people that are killing people and causing serious injury traffic accidents. They're the ones that are 50 and 60 miles an hour. Those are the people that are really causing the accidents. And so as distasteful as it may be to go from 35 to 40, although the general speed, that critical speed won't raise, the folks that you're focused on and you need to be able to do enforcement on are the folks that are doing very, very high speeds, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour on our surface streets.
So that's what I was going to say. The absolute critical necessity for us doing these updating these speed surveys is so you could use a laser gun.
Correct.
So is there, besides a laser gun, you could ticket for other matters like unsafe driving or?
But the issue is, especially you talked about, Councilman Bonner talked about residential streets. It's extraordinarily difficult for a police officer in a car or a motorcycle to pace somebody in a residential street that's speeding, because it is very, very dangerous to do that. And the streets are short. And the major streets, now you've got speed. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that really leaves you, other than pacing someone for 2 blocks to get a good speed for court, is laser enforcement, which is extraordinarily safe. The motor officer can literally sit on the side of the road, point that laser at folks and wave them over and not even get on that motor.
But they can still issue tickets for running a stop sign, running a signal, all the other violations that do not relate to speeding.
So if you did a speed survey and it went from 35 to 45, let's just say, you can't ticket anyone until they go above 45, right? With the speed gun, I mean, with laser gun.
Generally, we wouldn't ticket anybody till they were 5 miles over the speed limit.
Okay, so if it went from 25 to 60, just probably not the case, but if it went from after the speed survey, it went from 25 to 60, they would have to go 65 and over for you in order for you to give them a ticket.
Can I answer that question? That's a good question, Councilman. How it works, State of California, the 22350 of the Big Code, what gives the authority to enforce speed. We can write somewhere for going 30 and a 40 if it's unsafe for those conditions. For example, say it's 5:30 in the evening and traffic stop and go in the number 1, 2 lane, but the number 3 lane opens up because of parking restrictions lifted. And now you got somebody going 30 miles an hour down the curb lane when you got people going 5 to 10 in the next 2 lanes. That's unsafe for those conditions, so we don't have to wait for them to get to a certain speed. It all matters if it wasn't safe conditions at the time. And like Chief said, 50 miles per hour is where we start hitting that threshold of stopping distances getting super high. So if we raise the speed limit from 35 to 45, generally we started citing around 50 anyway. And we weren't citing anybody for going 40, 42, 43, 45. It all depends on the environment at the time.
Like rain, right?
Like rain, fog, sunlight. You know, if you're driving in the sun and you can't see, that means that people driving towards you can see, but they might turn in front of you.
Last question. Can't you guys give a ticket for going too slow?
Yes.
So if the speed limit, I'm giving a drastic example, went from 25 to 60, and then the person was used to going 25 and went 25, they could potentially get a ticket, right?
That's true, but it's not likely.
I do just want to underline something, though, that Chief Green brought up, which is why the state legislative change is so important. You know, the way that the speeds are enforced based on how they're signed, you know, means that somebody in a 35 going 40 gets a ticket at 40, but if we, you know, once the speed goes up, the ticket doesn't happen until you're going 45. And so, you know, particularly for people walking in our downtown areas and in you know, all of the parts of the city where we see large numbers of people being injured and killed that are biking and walking, people going faster than 40 miles an hour, you know, that is the threshold between life and death for somebody walking. So we care about, you know, the whole spectrum of the type of crashes related to speeding that could happen, and really feel as though that's something that, even though it will be tough uphill climb, is certainly worth fighting for in state legislation.
And I was just going to ask that, Mr. Chair, early when you started on this item, you talked about needing help at the state level and finding someone who can help us either author legislation. Do you have anyone in mind, or have we gone down that road?
No, not yet, but it's pretty clear we should do so. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to be aware of the fact that we just had a sobering report, and we have a television camera here. So I want us to be very clear and succinct about what steps LAPD and LADOT are taking to address this problem. So could you please just state very clearly, succinctly, in plain English, what resources you have and what we're going to be doing over the next year to address this problem and begin enforcing speeding in the city of Los Angeles and saving lives?
So I think the short answer is that, you know, we have been needing this opportunity to bring this forward and also to educate communities and neighborhoods about why this is going to start happening. That's issue number one, because there's somewhat of a barrier in terms of the resistance to raising speed. So this was the first step. The second step was getting the additional resources we need, both in personnel and in consultants and contractors, to go out and update all the speed surveys in very short order, so that over the course of the next year, we should be having greater and greater percentage of the high injury network that is enforceable, because we'll be moving back to, I mean, it's almost a doubling in resources to be able to drive down that backlog, capture the streets that are expiring, and get LAPD back out on the streets to be able to enforce unsafe speeds.
Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, you know, we're already poised with DOT to do education, and I'm poised to do enforcement. But the key piece is getting the survey and getting the survey approved so we can start the enforcement, sir.
Okay, so just to put a very fine point on it, It has been very clear, it's been well identified that we have a problem with enforcing speed limits in the city of Los Angeles. The City Council has heard that from both of the departments. In the budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1, we've allocated money and sufficient resources to begin updating the speed surveys so that LAPD can use their existing personnel to begin enforcing and doing more to protect lives of vulnerable pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists in the city of Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that. That's good news. It's good to hear that. I know this issue is also going to be in Public Safety Committee. What I'd like to do is keep updates going in this committee. So I'd like to get a written report back in 6 months once the new fiscal year has started and you've begun doing the things that you're talking about. I may ask for a verbal report sooner than that, just to keep it sort of in the front of the mind. But what I want the report to do is focus on, give a status report on the engineering and traffic surveys, including the number of completed surveys and any remaining backlog. And that's going to be sort of a rolling update report I'll want to keep getting in this committee. Also, a summary of enforcement activities that LAPD undertakes on individual high injury network streets where traffic surveys are current. So those that are current now and those that become current as a result of these surveys. And also a summary of the engineering improvements that LADOT will implement or have implemented by the time the report comes in on the high injury network to address speeding problems, including how the department will prioritize locations and develop strategies and how quickly they can be implemented. Does that sound good?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. When are we hearing this item in public safety? Because you and I sit on that committee as well.
I don't know. That would be up to the chair of public safety.
But this is not, sending it to that committee, we're going to move forward with.
Yes,
the different
absolutely.
aspects.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And everything they've said about stuff that's in the budget is happening regardless.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Great. Anything else that you need from this committee or from the council to help?
Just your support as we bring forward and have some of those difficult discussions about potentially raising speed limits.
The only thing I would suggest is that we also get an update on how the public education piece is going.
That's good. Let's add that.
Yeah,
to the report.
add that one, because
Absolutely.
that's
Great.
important. How are people reacting? Who are you
Right.
reaching? How many people are helping us with this effort? Both departments, both on the
Yeah, and
PD and DOT efforts.
And if you could, anything you need from our offices, let us know on how we could participate in that. And if you could give us some sort of a hot sheet in case people start calling our offices, like the threshold, 40 miles an hour for the pedestrian death, all the different benchmarks that we could share in case community starts calling us after they hear about this.
Great. Just a final response to your question, Councilman Bonin. We did request for each of the council offices to identify about 10 people or so that can help participate in the effort.
Right.
So I know that we started hearing back and just want to make sure that we continue moving that forward as well, because as Councilwoman Martinez pointed out, it's a really key component of those community connections, education, and outreach.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So we're holding the item in committee for the report for the continue, or are we? It's a receive and file, but we're asking for the report back and, okay, all right.
So are we going to do the actual receive and file and send it forward to the other committee, or we're just hold on
Yeah.
to this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Lastly, very grateful for the committee to the support. It is a huge public safety issue, and I'd like to recognize Officer Williams for the tremendous work that he's put into this.
Thank you very much for that recognition. That's important. I should also give a shout out to Director Cronin of the PPL, who's been vigilant about keeping this on everybody's radar screen, or laser, I guess, would be more appropriate than radar. Okay. That is the clears the desk. We have nothing else on the agenda. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned.